Check one, check.
Hey everybody! Tonight's episode is about a country most Americans couldn't find on a map with both hands and a GPS. And a bribe for the GPS, Zimbabwe. Just kidding, sort of. Zimbabwe is a landlocked nation in southern Africa, known for its stunning landscapes, from the majestic Victoria Falls to the ruins of Great Zimbabwe. Think of it as having all the beauty of a postcard and all the political drama of, well, you know. We'll be taking a wild ride through Zimbabwe's history. Buckle up, it's gonna be a bumpy one. Now, you might be wondering, John, why Zimbabwe? Well, it's a nation with a history as rich and complex as a fruitcake. And just as dense. Let's rewind to the Middle Ages, a time of knights, castles, and apparently thriving empires in southern Africa. Who knew, right? From the 11th to the 15th centuries, the Shona people built a powerful kingdom in what is now Zimbabwe. They called it Great Zimbabwe, which is about as creative as calling your band The Band. These guys weren't messing around. They constructed massive stone structures, traded gold with faraway lands, we're looking at you, Swahili Coast, and generally lived it up like medieval rock stars. But like all good rock bands, their time in the sun eventually faded, leaving behind a legacy of impressive ruins and a whole lot of unanswered questions. Fast forward a few centuries and colonialism crashes the party, like that one friend who shows up uninvited and drinks all your beer. The African continent, rich in resources and diverse cultures, suddenly found itself the target of European powers eager to carve out their own pieces of the pie. The scramble for Africa was on, and it was a chaotic, often brutal affair. In this case, the party crasher was a dude named Cecil Rhodes, a man with a name that sounds like a villain from a Charles Dickens novel, and an ambition that could rival Genghis Khan. Rhodes wasn't just any colonialist, he was a visionary with a grand plan. He saw Africa as a blank canvas on which he could paint his dreams of empire and wealth. Rhodes was obsessed with this whole Cape to Cairo railway thing. Basically, he wanted to build a train line from the bottom of Africa to the top, like some kind of Victorian-era Elon Musk with a colonial twist. This railway wasn't just about transportation, it was about control, influence, and the ability to move troops and resources across vast distances with ease. He formed the British South Africa Company, which sounds about as subtle as a hippo in a bathtub. And before you know it, the land that was once Great Zimbabwe became Southern Rhodesia. This company wasn't just a business, it was a tool of imperialism, a way to exert British control over vast swaths of African territory. Originality wasn't really colonialism's strong suit. The colonial powers often renamed places, erasing indigenous identities and histories in the process. They built their own structures, imposed their own systems, and exploited the land and its people for their own gain. The legacy of these actions is still felt today, as nations continue to grapple with the impacts of colonialism on their societies and economies. Section 4. Rise Up, the Fight for Zimbabwe. Now, the people who actually lived in southern Rhodesia weren't exactly thrilled about this whole colonial arrangement. Imagine someone waltzing into your house, changing the locks, and then telling you you're welcome to stay as long as you pay rent and do the dishes. By the mid-20th century, folks had had enough. A wave of liberation movements swept across Africa, and southern Rhodesia was caught right in the middle. Names like Joshua Nkomo and Robert Mugabe emerged as leaders of the resistance. These guys were serious about independence, willing to fight tooth and nail for their freedom. Think Nelson Mandela, but with a lot more complications later on. Section 5. Independence Day. Now what? After years of struggle, Zimbabwe finally won its independence in 1980, a momentous occasion. Cue the confetti, release the doves, it's party time. The joy was palpable. Except, governing a newly independent nation is a lot harder than it looks, and challenges were immediate. Imagine trying to rebuild a car after it's been driven through a war zone, piece by piece. That's basically what Zimbabwe was facing, a monumental task. There were high hopes for this new nation, dreams of prosperity. Zimbabwe had fertile land, abundant resources, and a young, eager population ready to build. The future seemed as bright as a bright thing, full of potential. Section 6. Mugabe, from hero to something else. Robert Mugabe, the former revolutionary, became Zimbabwe's first prime minister in 1980. His rise to power was seen as a monumental victory for the people of Zimbabwe, who had long suffered under colonial rule. He was initially hailed as a hero, a symbol of African liberation. Mugabe was the face of a new era, a beacon of hope for a nation that had endured decades of oppression. Think Nelson Mandela, early days before the whole prison thing. Mugabe was seen in a similar light, a freedom fighter who had defied the odds to lead his people to independence. But then things took a turn. Remember that car analogy? Mugabe's leadership started showing signs of wear and tear, much like a car that's been driven too hard for too long. Imagine if instead of rebuilding the car, the mechanic just started driving it around, ignoring the engine sputtering and the wheels wobbling. That's what Mugabe did with Zimbabwe. That's kind of what happened in Zimbabwe. The initial promise of a bright future began to fade as the realities of Mugabe's governance set in. Land reform, corruption, political repression. Mugabe's rule became increasingly authoritarian. His policies, once aimed at uplifting the nation, started to tear it apart. The economy went into a tailspin, inflation spiraled out of control, and the country that was once a beacon of hope became, well, let's just say it wasn't a good look. Zimbabwe faced one of the worst economic crises in history, and the dream of independence turned into a nightmare for many. Section 7, Zimbabwe Today, Hope on the Horizon. Zimbabwe, a nation with a rich history and a tumultuous past, has always been a land of contrasts. From its breathtaking landscapes to its complex political landscape, the country has seen it all. Mugabe was eventually ousted in 2017, which, depending on who you ask, was either a long overdue change or a coup. It's complicated. His departure marked the end of an era, but it also opened a new chapter filled with uncertainty and cautious optimism. Emerson Mnangagwa, a former Mugabe ally turned rival, took over. Known as the crocodile for his political cunning, Mnangagwa's rise to power was met with mixed reactions. Some saw him as a beacon of hope, while others were skeptical, fearing more of the same. He promised a new era for Zimbabwe, a time of reform and reconciliation. His speeches were filled with promises of economic revival, political stability, and a brighter future for all Zimbabweans. Think of it as a political reboot, like when they cast a new James Bond. So, what's the verdict? The initial euphoria was palpable, with people taking to the streets in celebration, hoping for a fresh start. Is Zimbabwe finally on the road to recovery? The signs are there, but the journey is far from over. Economic policies need to be reformed, and social issues addressed. It's too early to tell. The daily lives of Zimbabweans are still fraught with challenges, from inflation to unemployment. Yet there's a sense of resilience and determination among the people. The country still faces enormous challenges, from poverty to political instability. Protests and social unrest are common, but so is the spirit of community and the desire for a better future. But hey, at least there's hope. Hope that the new leadership will bring about the much-needed change. Hope that the natural beauty and resources of Zimbabwe will be harnessed for the benefit of its people. And after the roller coaster ride that is Zimbabwean history, hope is a pretty good place to start. The country's rich cultural heritage and stunning landscapes are a testament to its potential. That's it for tonight, folks. As we close this chapter, let's keep an eye on Zimbabwe and its journey. The story is far from over. See you next week when we'll be discussing, well, let's just say it involves a sloth, a pineapple, and a very confused ambassador. Stay tuned. Until then, keep the hope alive.